Mission Earth, a decalogy. What the hell is that? Well, it's a word that was invented to describe a 10-book story. The second unignorable fact about the series, these books were written by L Ron Hubbard, the founder of the Church of Scientology and a highly controversial figure. For folks in the church, he's LRH and a revered figure. For most other folks, he's a fraudster or con man and someone that many people love to hate. To me, he's a fascinating figure, and the line between myth and man has been so blurred. Part of the reason I read this series was to figure out who the guy really was. I'm not a Scientologist myself, but I have spent a brief period with the church, and I am to throw some of those anecdotes and experiences into my review. And then also, review is probably not the right word for this vlog. Maybe a GONZO review in the Hunter S. Thompson paradigm would be a better description, as my own involvement and personal experiences are key components to how I feel about this particular work. And of course, for those who don't know, GONZO journalism is a subjective style of writing where the journalist becomes a central figure in the story. There are some proper reviews of the first book and parts of the series on YouTube and elsewhere on the web. But I felt these didn't address the LRH issue and sometimes judge the work purely by what it is. In other words, looking at the book through 21st century eyeballs. And at other times, people couldn't stop looking at the fact that it's written by LRH, and because they hate the man, they hated the work as well. So there's what I've encountered is a lot of that. And I feel there should be a middle ground between it, to judge it, to look at what is written, what is the book, but also take the context from when it was written, etc., into consideration, and also look at a bit of the author behind it. So neither of these things is what I wanted to do. I've tried being objective, subjectively objective. My story with this book started in either 98 or 99. I was 19, 20 years old at the time. And I picked up a copy of the second book, Black Genesis, at a sale. At the same time, there was a copy of the very first book, that Invaders Plan, was at the local library. So I read both those books around 25 years ago. Book 1 and Book 2, and I found the reading a bit laborious, tedious. I didn't pursue the series. I did, however, recommend it to a friend. I actually recommended it to two friends. The one friend found it fascinating and continued reading most of the books, all the books he could get his hands on. I don't know how far he got. The other friend, 25 years later, he still has the first book and hasn't touched it and doesn't like it. And he's certainly never going to read it. But because the one friend really enjoyed the book, I've always wondered what made him enjoy it that much. What did he get from the book? So in the years since reading this, I did some Scientology courses and had a run-in with the church. This part of my GONZO review is essential in understanding the clusterfuck to follow. But I digress. Let's get back to the book. Mission Earth is written from the perspective of an alien that is on an undercover mission on planet Earth. And I'll be careful not to drop important spoilers in here in case I convince someone to read the books. But my aim is not to convince you either way. It's really such a super personal decision. I can hopefully give you a flavor of what it's about without reading it. I'm still gonna avoid spoilers. So the genre of this book is often classified as science fiction, but I would say that is grossly inaccurate. The aliens in this book are virtually indistinguishable from human beings. They are anatomically, physiologically, in all regards, exactly the same as human beings, except for the fact that they live much longer lives than humans here from planet Earth. But appearances, etc., exactly the same as human beings. So for most science fiction readers, that would be a serious deal breaker. And I think I can hardly imagine someone reading past page 30 that's looking for real science fiction. Luckily for me, I knew about this, the fact that the human beings and the aliens, were interchangeable, and the aliens could come here and pass themselves off as human beings. So I was able to suspend my disbelief. But upon first reading 25 years ago, it was too much of a stretch. Right now, in the years since, I appreciate this more as space opera. In other words, grand adventure and scientific accuracy plays no role in this genre. Then, another hurdle to overcome here is that the book is labeled satire. And again, I would say this is no Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett masterpiece. It's way too serious to be satire. So that leaves the question, who the fuck is this book for? So I would say this book, to enjoy this book, you should be fairly genre fluid. And if you are partial to tales of adventure, then it may be for you. The world created in the novel is top class. If you're equally at home in the genres of fantasy and science fiction, then it may also appeal to you. For me, that was part of it, of what I liked about it, this unclassifiable fantasy sci-fi. The fact that it's been on my bucket list for all these decades, and the fact that I find cult leaders fascinating. So there was a trifecta for me. I had to read it. So the story is told from the perspective of a villain. The villain of the story is the main character, the protagonist. And that takes some getting used to. But it becomes a particular strength of the series as it unfolds and progresses. And I think it's a creative gamble by the author that I think paid off ultimately in the final reckoning. This protagonist is a real piece of shit. And it's difficult, or scratch that, it's impossible to root for this character. So for all of this, when you add it up, you'd think I was saying, don't read this book. And I think these hurdles are worth mentioning, because if you won't be able to get over this, then you won't enjoy the book. So it's certainly not for everyone. But with that, let me digress into the Gonzo journalist style. So I'm going to interject myself into the proceedings. In 1999 or 2000, again, round about exactly the same time, I signed up for a course, a Scientology course called the Purification Rundown. And in a nutshell, the Purification Rundown is a lot of vitamin B3, niacin, and an enormous amount of time spent in a sauna daily, in a hot sauna, 4 hours a day. The program did wonders for me, and I seriously considered joining Scientology at that time to keep what they call the wins going. So there's a big thing about the wins, and they've got their own, like all cults, they've got their own way of speaking. But then after exactly 40 days on the program, I was approached by a staff member from the church who informed me that I could no longer proceed on the program because I worked for a South African government agency. So it's the equivalent of the IRS, this South African Revenue Services, SARS, that's what I worked for. And there's a policy on record that stated people who work for SARS, similar, or IRS, etc., those kind of organizations are not allowed to receive treatment. So until I changed jobs, I was not allowed to resume the program. This news hit me pretty hard. Yeah, so I was absolutely crestfallen at the time. I couldn't continue. But in retrospect, the good news was it snapped me out of this trance that had started to build up from, and also made some of the cultish things that were going on that you turn a blind eye to. Some of these cultish things started making a little bit more sense to me. So at my local library, same one where I got the first copy of this book as well. So at the local library, I discovered a book that was written somewhere in the 70s. And the book was quite critical of Scientology. And even though it was critical, it also highlighted, I felt it was objective. It was just focusing on the facts. So it talked about some of the run-ins that Scientology had with the IRS and the American Medical Association and the FBI and so on. So I can't remember the name of this book. And I tried searching on the web, couldn't find anything. There's so many books right now. My memory from that 25 years ago, it's not that it's that hazy, but I can't tell you what the name of that book was. So I don't think that's the important part here. There's an enormous amount of books out there that is critical or anti-Scientology. I think after the last decade, or maybe more than a decade, it's been brutal. Before the invention of the internet, I think Scientology had a harder time about spinning bullshit. But what is important to my story is that I appear to have discovered the reason for the weird policy that had me kicked out of the organization, one of these words again. So that at that time had me kicked out. I started exploring Scientology and LRH in particular on the internet, doing there was a research topic that I really enjoyed. And I started separating the myth of LRH that's believed and but preached by a lot of Scientologists and the outside by many people. And it is a very divisive figure, there's no doubt about it. So within the church, the man is deified. I remember someone once phoning me to ask me to come back to the church. And I said, no, thanks. And I found a home in Buddhism. And the response was, oh, wow, you should read The Hymn of Asia, which of course involved buying The Hymn of Asia as well. So I did. I bought it. And good God, man, it's basically a poem by LRH saying that he's the future Buddha Maitreya that had been prophesied by Buddhists from like the 5th century or so. The second coming of Buddha, if you will. On the other hand, you've got outside of Scientology, there are many accounts by people who knew LRH or people who knew LRH, etc., that claimed heavy drug use by this guy and fascination and possessed by, this fascination of the occult, especially Aleister Crowley. That's something I'd like to explore in some future. Maybe it's a bit too dark, so not right now. But that's a part of it. So this is really where things get interesting. I don't know how much of this stuff is true. I haven't pursued a deeper knowledge of this from different sources, etc., for a long time. But when I stumbled upon this Mission Earth books last year in a second-hand bookstore, a lot of these pieces came together for me, and I knew I was going to read the book. So because I had most of the books there, so I firmly believe that authors unwittingly leak out things about themselves when they write. You might get things like their worldview, long-held beliefs, these kind of things. It's like it's behind the words that they're writing. By reading the books, I figured I'd be able to get an inside view of the man. So in other words, not from someone else or from reading or from the church publications, etc., something he's written. And I've been curious about him for a very long time. So back to the story. The protagonist, whom I earlier mentioned, is a very unsavory character, Sultan Gris, works for a secret organization, alien organization called the Apparatus. And it's a secret organization to Earth as well. So it's secret to Earth and it's secret within the society that he lives in. So this planetary federation of all these numerous different planets and things, 100 and something planets part of this federation. So I felt this characterization of the Apparatus was very much influenced by LRH's view of the CIA. So today, things like regime change operations are accepted as widespread fact, an irrefutable tactic followed by the United States, part of this imperialism. And it might have sounded like conspiracy theories many, many years ago, but today there's Wikipedia, pages dedicated to this, about these regime change operations, etc., whether they're overt or covert, etc. So the operation of the Apparatus in Mission Earth illustrates, I think, these covert operations that may be carried out by autonomous state actors or organizations is something that he's focused on, something as part of his worldview or something that he's got something to say about. So I'm not sure this is exactly what LRH believed about it, but I think there's strong hints throughout these 10 books that he viewed these secret organizations as being run by criminals, hardened criminals, insane criminals, that view the populace as riffraff, to quote the book. So That's one thing that I think I've picked up from the book, my reading between the lines. So also LRH's view of drugs, also something I found fascinating. It's quite prevalent in the book, in the themes of this book. LRH spent some time on a recreational usage, talking about the recreational usage of drugs like marijuana especially. But it doesn't emerge as a strong theme within the story. The usage of LSD as a tool for mind control, subversion, and perversion, the old MK Ultra, is an enormously strong theme. So my reading here is that its usage is intertwined with his distaste for the theories of Freud or psychoanalysis and his utter repulsion and rejection of queerness. I think it can be safely assumed he did not hold live and let live views on homosexuality. Back to the topic of drugs. There have been accusations of LRH being a methamphetamine addict, and someone who took a lot of pills, a pill popper, etc., even while he was researching and writing some of his Scientology books. And I think from reading his book, the anecdotal evidence are that he probably was on stimulants. I think maybe he wasn't. Maybe it was just, I'm not saying there's really evidence of it being on stimulants. But with the exception of that first book, all of these books were written or published posthumously. So 9 of these were published posthumously after he had died. And he died at the age of 74. So if we say, I can't find information about when he penned these books, but I do think it was in the twilight of his years. This is a guy that has four Guinness World Records, including most published works by one author. And if he was on drugs, then it must have made him very clear-minded. Throughout nearly 4,000 pages of this series, he really connects all these little dots, things that he wrote in one book. So you'd find something, a character you see in book 1 would reappear in book 10. With no discontinuity, no issues whatsoever. So let's say he wrote it, the last 10 years of his life. And if we say, the continuity is there, characters that show up in book 1 continue in book 10. You haven't read them in a year and a half, or during that a long time, these characters haven't been part of the story. I think I have to give credit where credit is due. This guy I think it's remarkable. Here's this character, here's that character. I think as a writer of science fiction, etc., and let's say it was his last 10 years of his life, right? So let's say between 64 and 74, between those 10 years, it's probably less than that. But let's say it's a 10-year period. To be this clear-minded, to hold that story so close together, even though it's not science fiction and stuff, scientific thinking and accuracy is not a particular strong point of this dude. But when it comes to characters and a story, he's got something. Credit where credit is due. Is this now all of a sudden a glowing review? Fuck no. There are issues with the story. There are some issues with the story, certainly, like the stuff I've mentioned in the beginning as well. But overall, I feel it holds up, at least in my view, as a fiction and science fiction fan, and a fan of authors like Robert Heinlein and Philip K. Dick, especially in the science fiction area. LRH shares some similarities in his writing. For one, he's hopelessly ideological, like Heinlein. Most of the time, he's actually naively ideological. The explanations of how the world works and interactions between people are definitely oversimplified and illustrates a lack of appreciation for complexity. It's like people have become conspiracy theories. I think a lot of times they have that issue. The explanation of something so clear to them, this is what caused that, etc., because they're looking for this very simple, these are the reasons why these things are happening. And I think in a sense, yeah, he had that as well. And I'm saying that not just from reading this, but also from having read Dianetics and listened to his lectures and a lot of other shit that he's created through the years, etc. But this ideological bent that the guy has, it's not like I haven't seen this before. Most sci-fi writers or science fiction written in the 1930s suffer from the same tropes. And never mind sci-fi. American pulp fiction from the 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe 60s. I'm not sure. I think the 60s started getting a bit better, but definitely 50s still. Were all about escapism, idealization. And that's where this guy cut his teeth, let's be honest, That's what made Dianetics so the appeal of Dianetics was so wide to such a big audience, was that idealism. So I will not crucify him for that. His views on women, good Lord, misogyny is baked into the tale. The hero's better half, the Countess Croc, is at once the most beautiful woman in the world, and also suffers from extreme emotional instability. She's a cold-blooded killer, kill without flinching. And if that's the stuff his fantasy is made of, then that's pretty wild. So this weird man cast a big shadow, and with good reason. He's still a divisive figure. The many reviews I've encountered are tainted by the person's view, the person's reviewing. A lot of it is tainted. Some people claim that, the sex scenes in the book are depraved and should be censored, or the book should be removed, and it's unbecoming of someone that's the leader of a spiritual movement and these kind of things. It's unfitting, etc. But maybe in the 80s when this came out, maybe it was. But I think in today's standards, or the standards of the last 20 years or so, etc., I don't think his sexual views don't strike me as any wackier than Heinlein's views. In fact, Heinlein's is a lot more wacky than him. So I hope this is a balanced review. I hope it's a balanced review of his work. I know it's very gonzo because it's so deeply personal to me as well. And are these the best books I've read in my life? No. Hell no. It's not the best books that I've read. But I read it for what it is. And in the process, I gained a deeper insight into one of the more eccentric madmen of the 20th century. Throughout the months that I read this, I felt LRH was a friend, through some lonely months and tough times, etc. Like that old weird uncle that you've got, that not very many people give a fuck about him. But he's your uncle, and you've known him all your life. And he's been through some wars and all these things. And he's picked up some quirks and all kinds of weird shit along the way. But you don't notice that. All you know is he came out the other side of all of that shit that happened to him. Still hopeful, still optimistic. And I think that says something about the resilience of the old bastard. So I'm glad I read these books in the final analysis, that I did read them. I did enjoy them. But I do find it's a bit like a historic footnote that's fading in time. So unless you're someone that enjoys reading pulp fiction from the past, this is probably not for you. And also it helps to have a bit of an understanding of the life of this character and the things he's been through and what informed his view and what he considered his big life work, etc. So it is historic. It's probably not going to age very well. It's already not aging particularly well. And maybe the stuff we're reading right now, but we're living in the future. So we're living in the time where a lot of science fiction writers were writing this stuff. And some of the stuff I read from Heinlein, it's, even 60s or 50s, etc., some of the classic stuff, it's difficult to read because writers have evolved so much since then. The zeitgeist have moved on a long way. Characters are a lot more developed. We don't hold these, idealistic views about the world, or we shouldn't in any case. Or basic, or simplify things, ignore the complexity of the world. That doesn't work. I think I've made it clear whose cup of tea this would be. But what I do want to say is thanks, old man. I enjoyed it with all these caveats and things that I put in as well. I really enjoyed the series at the end of the day. And fuck the haters. You write a mean space opera.